Imagine a world where violence is the only language spoken, where every thought of the human heart is bent toward destruction, and where the Creator looks upon his masterpiece and feels a profound, shattering grief. The earth is dying, choked by the cruelty of its own inhabitants. A shadow of divine judgment gathers, dark and absolute, ready to wash away centuries of corruption. Yet, in this suffocating darkness, a single light remains. One man stands against the tide of a wicked generation. One man is chosen to carry the future of humanity and all breathing life upon his shoulders. This is not just a story of a boat and a storm. It is the ultimate saga of faith against impossible odds, of a cataclysm that fractured the earth, and of a solitary family drifting over the drowned ruins of a forgotten world. This is the epic, terrifying, and triumphant true story of Noah and the Great Flood. To understand the magnitude of the flood, we must first look at the world that preceded it. This was not the world as we know it today. The earth in the days before the deluge was a place of extraordinary vitality, but it had become a theater of unimaginable darkness. Generations had passed since the gates of Eden were closed. Mankind had multiplied, spreading across the face of the earth, building cities, forging metals, and creating music. But with this rapid expansion came a rapid descent into moral decay. The scriptures tell us that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It was an era of tyranny and bloodshed. The earth was filled with violence. The strong preyed upon the weak, and the sacredness of life was entirely forgotten. It was also an age of strange and terrifying phenomena. The ancient texts speak of the Nephilim, giants in the earth, mighty men of old, men of renown. Whether these were tyrannical rulers, fierce warriors, or something even more mysterious, their presence contributed to an atmosphere of dread and absolute corruption. The earth was corrupt before God. The harmony of creation had been shattered into a million jagged pieces. When the Creator looked down upon the earth he had formed from the void, the earth he had pronounced very good, he was met with a chorus of cruelty. The grief of God in this moment is one of the most profound mysteries of the ancient texts. He did not look upon humanity with cold, calculated anger, but with a heart heavy with sorrow. It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. The grand experiment of human freedom had resulted in a nightmare. The decree of judgment was absolute. The earth had to be cleansed. The infection of evil had run so deep that only a total eradication could save the future of creation. God declared that he would destroy man, whom he had created from the face of the earth, along with the beasts, the creeping things, and the birds of the air. A great deluge, a flood of waters, would be unleashed to wipe the slate clean. But God's justice is always perfectly balanced with his mercy. Even in the face of global annihilation, grace found a foothold. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Who was this man, Noah? He was the son of Lamech, the grandson of Methuselah, a man whose lineage traced back to Seth, the son given to Adam and Eve after the tragic death of Abel. Noah lived in the midst of a depraved society, yet he remained untouched by its poison. He is described as a just man, perfect in his generations, and a man who walked with God. In a world where everyone else was running toward their own destruction, Noah matched his steps to the rhythm of the divine. He was a beacon of righteousness in a landscape of total moral blackout. And because of this quiet, steadfast faithfulness, God chose him for a task that would defy human logic and require a lifetime of grueling labor. God spoke to Noah, "Pull back the veil on the impending doom." He revealed the end of all flesh and commanded Noah to build an ark. This was not to be a simple boat. It was to be a massive vessel of salvation, a floating sanctuary designed to preserve the seed of life through a cataclysm that would tear the world apart. The blueprint was delivered directly from the architect of the universe. Noah was to make the Ark of gopher wood, a mysterious and resilient timber, perhaps cypress or cedar, strong enough to withstand the crushing forces of the deep. He was to construct rooms inside it, and most importantly, he was to cover it inside and out with pitch. This thick, tar-like substance would render the massive wooden structure perfectly watertight. The dimensions given to Noah are staggering, even by modern engineering standards. The ark was to be 300 cubits in length, 50 cubits in breadth, and 30 cubits in height. To put this in perspective, using the standard ancient cubit, the ark was approximately 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It was the length of 1.5 football fields and stood as tall as a 4-story building. It was not designed for navigation. It had no sails, no oars, no rudder. Its sole purpose was to float, to endure, and to keep its inhabitants alive. It was designed with 3 distinct decks, lower, middle, and upper, and a window finished to a cubit from the top to provide light and ventilation. A single, massive door was to be set in its side. Imagine the sheer physical toll of this undertaking. Noah was not a shipwright living in a coastal shipyard. He was a man of the land, commanded to build an ocean liner-sized vessel on dry ground. There were no power tools, no cranes, no modern supply chains. Every massive beam of gopher wood had to be felled, stripped, transported, and hoisted into place by human hands. The deafening sound of the adze striking wood, the suffocating smoke of boiling pitch, the raw blisters, and the aching muscles became the daily reality for Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But the physical labor was perhaps the easiest part of the burden. The psychological and emotional toll must have been unimaginable. Decades passed. The massive wooden skeleton rose slowly against the sky, a bizarre and terrifying monument to an unseen threat. The local inhabitants surely noticed. They would have gathered to watch this massive construction project, pointing, laughing, and throwing insults. Noah became an object of relentless mockery. The ancient texts call him a preacher of righteousness. As he worked, he surely warned his neighbors of the coming wrath. He pleaded with them to turn from their violence, to look at the ark as a testament to the reality of God's judgment. But his words fell on deaf, hardened ears. The idea of water falling from the sky in such volumes as to flood the earth was absurd to them. They continued eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, completely oblivious to the ticking clock of their own extinction. Noah's faith was tested every single morning. He had to wake up, face the jeers of his contemporaries, look up at a perfectly clear sky, and continue building a boat for a flood he had never seen. This is the very essence of faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For years, perhaps up to a century, Noah hammered, sawed, and sealed, driven by nothing but the invisible word of God. As the colossal structure neared completion, the shadow of judgment grew darker. The time of grace was running out. God spoke to Noah once again, issuing the final, chilling instructions. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, 8 human souls in total, were to enter the ark. But they were not to go alone. In one of the most mysterious and majestic events in human history, the animal kingdom was summoned. Noah did not have to journey to the corners of the earth to trap and herd wild beasts. The Creator, who had formed every living creature from the dust, placed a divine homing instinct within them. 2 of every sort of unclean animal, male and female, and 7 of every clean animal began a miraculous migration toward the towering wooden structure on the plain. Imagine the sight that must have silenced the mockers. From the forests, the jungles, the deserts, and the skies, a vast, orderly procession of life converged upon the ark. Lions walking in tandem, elephants shaking the ground with their heavy steps, flocks of birds darkening the sky, descending in a flurry of wings to to find their designated perches within the wooden sanctuary. The creeping things, the majestic beasts, the fragile insects, all drawn by an invisible hand to the only place of refuge on a dying planet. For 7 days, this awe-inspiring loading process continued. Noah and his family organized the animals, settling them into their enclosures, surrounded by the cacophony of thousands of different species. The smell of hay, the sound of lowing cattle, the roaring of predators, and the chirping of birds filled the cavernous decks. Outside, the world watched. Did the laughter die down? Did a creeping sense of dread begin to take hold in the hearts of the violent men who had mocked Noah for a lifetime? When the last animal was safely inside and the provisions were entirely stored, Noah and his family stood at the threshold of the massive wooden door. They looked out at the world one last time, the world they had known, the world of their ancestors, a world that was about to be erased from existence. They stepped inside the ark, and then a detail of profound theological weight is recorded. The Lord shut him in. Noah did not close the door, God did. This act signified 2 vital truths. First, it was a guarantee of absolute security. What God seals, no storm can break open. But second, it marked the terrifying finality of judgment. The time for repentance was over. The door of salvation was locked from the outside. Those inside were safe, those outside were doomed. For 7 days, they sat in the ark. 7 days of waiting in the dim light, surrounded by the sounds of restless animals. Outside, the sky remained unchanged. The tension must have been suffocating. And then, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the world ended. It did not begin with a gentle shower. The scriptures describe a cosmic catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. This was a dual assault of water. From above, the atmospheric canopy collapsed, unleashing torrential, blinding sheets of rain, unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. From below, the Earth's crust fractured. Massive subterranean oceans burst forth under immense pressure, shooting geysers of scalding water and debris miles into the sky. The ground shook with violent earthquakes, mountains splintered, valleys collapsed. The oceans roared past their boundaries, sending colossal tidal waves sweeping across the continents. Inside the ark, the noise must have been deafening. The roar of the rushing waters, the howling of the hurricane winds, and the terrifying groans of the massive timber hull as it was lifted from the earth. The ark pitched and rolled violently. Noah and his family clung to the wooden beams, surrounded by terrified animals plunging into the dark unknown. Outside, the panic was absolute. The men and women who had laughed at Noah now screamed in terror as the waters rose. They scrambled for higher ground, climbing trees, scaling hills, rushing toward the peaks of mountains. But the water was relentless. It pursued them with a cold, merciless fury. It swallowed the cities of violence. It drowned the monuments of human pride. It silenced the cries of the wicked. For 40 days and 40 nights, the onslaught continued without a single moment of pause. The water rose higher and higher until even the highest mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The water stood 15 cubits upward above the highest peaks. Every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven. The mighty Nephilim, the violent warlords, the great builders of a corrupt age, all were swept away like dust. The earth was completely submerged, a desolate, churning sphere of water spinning in the dark void, returning to the chaotic state of its very first day of creation. Only Noah remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. Imagine the reality of life inside that wooden vessel. The 40 days of violent tempest eventually ended, but the waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. 5 months of drifting on a boundless, shoreless ocean. There was no sky to navigate by, only the grey, oppressive clouds overhead. There was no steering the massive ship. They were entirely at the mercy of the currents and the wind. Inside, the work was relentless. 8 people tending to thousands of animals, feeding, cleaning, watering, surviving. The air was thick and heavy. The only light came from the single window at the top. In the quiet moments, when the animals slept and the ark rocked gently on the endless waves, what did Noah think about? Did he mourn for the world that was lost? Did he weep for the neighbors who had mocked him, whose bodies now drifted in the abyss below? The isolation must have been crushing. They were the last remnants of humanity, sealed in a wooden box, floating over a graveyard of billions. Day after day, week after week, nothing but water. It would have been so easy to succumb to despair, to wonder if God had forgotten them, to fear that they would simply drift until their food ran out and they died in the dark. But then, the ancient text delivers one of the most beautiful and pivotal sentences in all of Scripture. But God remembered Noah. God had not abandoned his servant. He had not forgotten the remnant of life sealed within the pitch-covered walls. He caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters began to subside. The violent, churning ocean began to calm. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain was restrained. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the water level began to drop. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, a sudden, jarring thud resonated through the hull of the ark. The endless drifting ceased. The massive vessel groaned and settled. The ark had rested upon the mountains of Ararat. They were no longer adrift, but they were still surrounded by a world of water. For months, they waited as the waters continually decreased. Finally, in the 10th month, the jagged, muddy tops of the mountains became visible through the window. At the end of 40 days after seeing the peaks, Noah opened the window of the ark. He needed to know the condition of the earth below. He sent out a raven, a strong, scavenging bird. The raven flew to and fro, resting on the floating debris, surviving on the wreckage of the old world, but it did not return to the ark. Noah then sent out a dove, a bird that requires clean, dry resting places and fresh vegetation. But the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. The earth was still covered in mud and water. Exhausted, she returned to the ark, and Noah gently reached out his hand and pulled her back to safety. He waited another 7 days, a testament to his immense patience. He did not force his way out of the ark. He waited on the timing of God. He sent the dove out a second time. All day, Noah and his family waited by the window, watching the horizon. As evening approached, a small speck appeared in the sky. The dove fluttered down, landing on the windowsill. And there, held delicately in her beak, was a freshly plucked olive leaf. It was just a small leaf, but it was the most beautiful sight human eyes had seen in nearly a year. It meant the waters had receded enough for trees to sprout. It meant the earth was healing. It meant the judgment was over and life was beginning again. That simple olive branch became an eternal symbol of peace, of hope, and of a second chance. Noah waited yet another 7 days and sent the dove out a third time. This time, she did not return. She had found her home in the newly cleansed world. In the 601st year of Noah's life, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked out. The face of the ground was dry, but still he did not move. He had entered the ark by the command of God, and he would not leave it until God spoke again. Finally, in the 2nd month, the 27th day of the month, the voice of the Creator broke the silence. "Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, that they may breed abundantly in the earth and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. The massive door, sealed by God over a year ago, was finally opened. The light of the sun poured into the dim holds of the ark. The ramp was lowered, and out they came. The animals, after a year of confinement, spilled out onto the earth. Birds took to the sky, beasts of the field ran across the drying mud, and the creeping things dispersed into the rocks. The earth, once filled with the deafening roar of violence and the terrifying crash of the floodwaters, was now filled with the sounds of new life. Noah, his wife, his sons and their wives stepped off the wooden ramp and felt the solid earth beneath their feet. They stood under a vast, open sky, breathing in the crisp, clean air of a washed world. They were the survivors, the pioneers of a brand new era. But Noah's first act upon leaving the ark was not to build a house for himself. It was not to plant a field or claim territory. His very first act in this new world was an act of worship. He gathered stones and built an altar to the Lord. He took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. This was a profound gesture of gratitude, of awe, and of recognition. Noah understood that he had not survived because of his own brilliant engineering or his own strength. He had survived entirely by the grace of God. The smoke of the sacrifice rose into the clear sky, carrying with it the thanksgiving of the human race. The scriptures say that the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. The sacrifice of Noah touched the heart of God. In that moment, looking down at the smoking altar and the tiny, fragile family standing in the massive emptiness of the reborn earth, God made a profound resolution. He said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, although the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Nor will I again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease." God acknowledged the inherent flaw that still existed within humanity. The flood had washed away the wicked men, but it had not washed away the sin nature from the human heart. Yet, God chose to respond with an eternal promise of preservation. He blessed Noah and his sons, repeating the ancient command given to Adam in the garden, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." But God did not just give a promise, he provided a sign, a visible, breathtaking seal of his covenant. He said, "I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be, when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh." Imagine standing with Noah on that mountain, looking up at the sky. As a gentle rain fell, the sun broke through the clouds, striking the water droplets and painting a massive, brilliant arc of colors across the heavens. In the ancient world, a bow was a weapon of war, an instrument of death and judgment. But God took his bow and hung it in the sky, pointing it away from the earth, pointing it toward heaven. It was a declaration that the war of the flood was over. The weapon of judgment was retired. The rainbow was a majestic, colorful promise that no matter how dark the clouds might gather, the total destruction of the earth by water would never happen again. The story of Noah and the Great Flood is far more than a tale from antiquity. It is a terrifying display of God's absolute holiness and his intolerance for unchecked evil. It reminds us that our actions matter, that violence and corruption grieve the heart of the Creator, and that justice will ultimately be served. But rising above the dark waters of judgment is the towering reality of God's grace. Noah is a testament to the power of one life lived in obedience to God. In a world entirely consumed by darkness, one man's faith became the vessel of salvation for the entire world. He endured the mockery of his peers, the grueling labor of decades, and the terrifying unknown of the chaotic deep, simply because he believed the word of his Creator. Today, we do not look to a wooden ark for our physical salvation from a global flood, but the ark remains a powerful, enduring symbol. It represents the refuge that God always provides for those who trust Him in the midst of life's most devastating storms. It reminds us that even when the world around us seems to be drowning in chaos, violence, and despair, there is a sanctuary of grace. The next time you see a rainbow stretched across a stormy sky, do not just see a trick of the light. See the ancient promise. Remember the man who built a ship on dry land. Remember the terrifying roar of the deep, the silence of the floating sanctuary, and the fragile dove carrying an olive leaf. Remember that we live on an earth that was once buried in water and reborn by grace under the watchful, merciful eye of a God who remembers His people and who keeps His promises forever.